Oh, you couldn't hear me. Okay, whatever. I'll cut that out. Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Sly Army Tier Lists. And tonight we get ourselves a bit of a special one tonight because we're actually going to be ranking not just the movies, but also the video games, the one singular television show, and the books of one of my personal favorite franchises of all time. Well, it's more of a colloquial term for multiple different properties, but we're going to be talking about Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but I'm just going to colloquially just call it the Middle-earth franchise. And this one's going to be an interesting tier list for me because, truth be told, I've talked a lot about Lord of the Rings before and The Hobbit, sparingly. And I talked about it a lot, but I never actually sort of explained why I've always appreciated this sort of franchise. And it's just kind of weird thinking about that because, if you guys know, obviously, one of my favorite franchises of all time is Star Wars. We did a whole tier list on it 2 years ago, back in May of 2023. And truth be told, I have a very similar amount of love for both Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as well. It is just one of those franchises that I grew up with as a late kid going into my teenage years that I've really, really appreciated. And it was definitely one of the first franchises as well that made me realize that if I'm going to be honest, I actually think I prefer fantasy over sci-fi, like a bit. Yeah, I know that might sound a bit heretical because I feel like most people prefer science fiction over fantasy. I just feel like all the time I always hear people either express their love for more for more science fiction settings, or just the amount of video games and movies that are set in outer space, or just some sort of weird alternate parallel universe, all that fun stuff. But Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or just, Middle-earth as a whole, was really one of the first things that got me into more fantastical stuff. Because keep in mind, and I mentioned this before, I used to be someone who was really, really into history. Like, specifically Renaissance history back. So think, like the Middle Ages, or even just going into ancient history and all that fun stuff. Well, truth be told, a lot of fantasy tropes they took inspiration from not only historical like settings, but also mythology from that history. And as far as I'm concerned, The Hobbit, at least, was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, big examples of a major high fantasy concept that we know today. Because, well, truth be told, without the original books, honestly, a lot of the big franchises of fantasy that we know today probably wouldn't even exist. Like, Dungeons and Dragons wouldn't exist, Final Fantasy wouldn't exist, Warhammer Fantasy, and by extension, Age of Sigmar definitely wouldn't have existed. The Witcher, Dragon Age, these are, hell, arguably even stuff like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. But or even Narnia, big example right there. So for me, it's just always I hold a lot of respect for this series of originally what were novels that eventually became adaptations later down the line. And that got me thinking, because I really, really, really love the Peter Jackson films a lot. But that also got me thinking about, what about the other media that adapted this universe? Because there's plenty of video games that have been made over the years that people praise to this day. But at the same time, there really isn't that many in comparison. Unlike something like Star Wars or Warhammer 40k, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they never really had that many games released, surprisingly enough. And so, unlike the Star Wars tier list, we're going to be ranking the books, the movies, the video games, and the singular television show that's out right now. So, strap in, folks. This is going to be a bit of a doozy. So, well, a doozy in a good way, because I'm so excited about it. Because, well, truth be told, Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite franchises of all time. Just the world building, all that fun stuff. But yeah, before we get into this, I want to make sure that everything is running smoothly on both YouTube and Twitch, because again, I apologize for that weird intro. Admittedly, it's been kind of a crazy day, so there's just been a lot of stuff going on in the background. So, and yeah, it looks like yep, we're pretty much good. So, but yeah, that's all I gotta really say before we get into this. And keep in mind, similar to our Disney movie tier, like our Walt Disney Animation Studios tier list, this is arguably the oldest franchise, in air quotes, if you can even really call it a franchise. Well, if you could call it a franchise, if it's been scattered around for a long time, that we'll be talking about. Because, like I said, we are going to be covering the books, and I think how we're going to set this tier list up is I'll cover the books first, then I'll talk about the films, and then I'll talk about the video games. But I am going to do them in chunks, because admittedly, I don't want to spend too much time talking about these. Not because I don't appreciate this franchise, because I had a Lord of the Rings poster for the first few years of my college. I don't even know if you guys remember seeing that poster on the background of one of my walls. I still think I actually have that poster. It was like a Fellowship of the Ring poster that I had. You guys may have seen it, but I just don't remember where it went. Ready, is it? Oh no, that's my Weezer poster. Oh, it's in here. That's right. Or at least no? God damn it. Oh. God damn it. I don't remember where I put it. But you get the point. Lord of the Rings means a lot to me. So don't get it twisted. It's just, admittedly, I am kind of getting busy for these next few days. So I hope you guys at least don't mind these being shorter. And I think it would be better for people to watch shorter tier lists anyways. But yeah, either way, let's just jump right into this. And we're going to start off with the original piece of media, books. Which, yes, that makes this the first tier list that will be ranking books. I never do that because, well, I am admittedly dyslexic. So that's the reason why I don't really talk about books all that much. It's because I literally have dyslexia. I've always had issues when it comes to reading. That being said, though, I did actually read all of these books. So I actually have, unfortunately not an original copy, but I do have, I think I have 2 copies of The Hobbit somewhere in here. God damn it, where is it? I need to organize this better. Yeah, I know. It's gonna be one of these tier lists, by the way, where I'm gonna be referencing a lot of the stuff in my shelf. So prepare yourselves. But yeah. Oh, there it is. So I do have a copy of The Hobbit. Unfortunately, it's not an original copy. The cover that you see right there is actually an original copy of this. I think this is a... I want to say this is like a... Okay, 1990... Yeah, this is a 1996 edition of the book. So, way newer, but it's still actually a pretty cool looking one. But anyways, so... And I did read the other books, actually throughout high school. Except for the Silmarillion. I think I read that one in my first year in college. So yeah, yes, it was my first year. So yeah, literally like whenever we were doing the tier lists. That being said, how I would rank the books themselves, and keep in mind that I should have prefaced this before going into this. There's not really any rules, by the way, as far as this tier list. It's going to be just kind of a straightforward as ranking pretty much all the major releases of just Lord of the Rings media. I did avoid anything that was not in English because I know there's some releases, like unofficial releases, that were in Finnish or even Turkish. So that's always great. But as far as canon, because that's something that is a bit like contentious with people, keep in mind that I mostly just chose the books as far as this, specifically the books that were written and mostly completed by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. Thus, these 7 books right here are considered core canon as far as Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is concerned. And these are the main books that are explicitly canon within Middle-earth. Everything else is either loosely associated with it or it's part of the Peter Jackson canon, which obviously we'll get to that in a minute. But as far as how I would rank these, so the original Hobbit, and keep in mind as far as books, they do update them occasionally, but we're just kind of talking about these books colloquially. I think I'm going to, and this might surprise some people, I'm going to rank the original Hobbit book S tier, and then Fellowship of the Ring and Return of the King A tier, Two Towers S tier, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil in C tier, The Silmarillion in B tier, and then The Unfinished Tales in C tier. That might surprise a lot of people because, again, I am not someone who really reads a lot of books. As a matter of fact, but what I do is that I occasionally use audiobooks to kind of help me read, just so that I can get through any sort of book that I need to. Now, I use that for my classes. I actually use that for my math course that I have actually for this semester because again, I'm dyslexic. I can't like fully read. That being said, though, I am putting The Hobbit, the original book of this franchise. I'm putting this shit in S tier, and it's not just because it was, it's not just because it was one of the first books that I remember really, really liking, growing up, but also you have to keep in mind that The Hobbit was pretty much a game changer as far as an entire new genre. It wasn't technically the first fantasy book. I mean, there's been plenty of fantasy stories that have existed before. I mean, a lot of, I mean, hell, a lot of Disney films are based off of old fairy tales from back in the day, which I guess those could be considered technically fantasy in their own right. But The Hobbit, it was a different type of fantasy. It was, weirdly enough, this was considered a children's book. Yes, 1930s kids read this. This whole ass 350 page book. Oh no, it's about 300, or at least this edition is. So yeah, like this was considered a children's book back in the day. Nowadays, it's pretty much considered a major novel, though at the same time, Narnia was also considered a children's book, which, I mean, that one definitely fits in more, but I'm not getting into semantics. But point is, this was a game changer, because this was basically, as far as I'm concerned, one of the first examples of something that was considered true high fantasy in the sense that it was not based off of any specific real life mythology, because old fairy tale stories, they at least had some what of a semblance to where they came from. Like, for example, Cinderella, that was definitely something that is from, yeah, it has kind of a vague setting, but we can just assume that it takes place in Germany. Or something like Snow White, also Germanic in nature. Pinocchio, I'm pretty sure, I want to say it was Italian, like Germanic Italian. Basically, a lot of these fairy tales were from Germany, or like Holy Roman Empire, whenever. I don't think they were medieval in nature, but whatever, that's besides the point. Point is, this was the first major thing alongside, like, that had nothing to do with the real world. And not only that, but also it was one of those books that was one of the earliest examples of good world building in a lot of ways. This, along with a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's work back in the early 20th century, they were honestly some of the biggest pioneers as far as world building full-on universes as we know them today. And not only that, but also, this is just kind of, in hindsight, it might seem like it's a pretty basic tale in the sense that, you're following some dude and they're pretty much put into this journey to go across an entire realm to go up against a dragon. That might seem pretty basic in and of itself, but at the time, just the fact that this was expanded upon and even had some light commentary on, just war and conflict, or at least at the end of the book. I don't know. We'll get to Battle of the Five Armies, the movie, once we get to it. It has many different problems. But to sum up that scene here, it's only 10 pages in this entire book. And it's basically just J.R.R. Tolkien just doing, basically just him shitting on World War One, just or using this as like a using this as a surrogate for him to shit on World War One, because for those who don't know, he actually was a British soldier in World War One. I don't know if it was one of the things that directly inspired him to write the books, but it definitely influenced his work. But you get the point. As far as novels, this helped change the game as far as not only just world building, but also just one of the earliest examples of how we see things of the hero's journey at this point onwards. So, and like I said, even though that I did have to use a audiobook for this, I still think that this is still an enjoyable read that I do recommend anyone read themselves, especially if you're someone who wants to get into fantasy. This is definitely one of your first steps you should take. And pretty much any version, any edition, as far as I'm aware, is pretty much in the clear. So go and read this for yourselves. So yeah, after the pretty slow but pretty decent success of this, because keep in mind this book released 2 years before World War II. So yeah, they weren't really publishing a lot of of these. It wouldn't be until after the war where this started to get a decent amount of attention, at least in the United Kingdom. And pretty much after the war, that inspired J.R.R. Tolkien to eventually write what is now known as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which, that funny enough, was a name that was coined after all these 3 books were released. So keep that in mind as we talk about these next 3 books. But as far as I'm concerned, these 3 books are also really damn good. They expand upon the world of what was established here, because again, J.R.R. Tolkien, he wrote this world just kind of as a bit of I don't want to say as escapism, but basically just kind of his sort of take on what he could have thought a world could have existed in a more fantastical setting. And that then translated into his next major projects. He wrote some other books throughout this time period, but they were more medieval based, or at least medieval fantasy based, somewhere in like England or something like that. But these were the next books that were set in Middle-earth. And I would definitely say that these are still really good, but you do have to read them in like kind of together, because they tell the cohesive narrative of, well, basically going up against Sauron. And I mean, you guys probably already know the story. Obviously, we'll get to the movies later, but I mean, there's also a lot that they changed, keep in mind. I mean, there's an entire faction called the Varyags that exist in Return of the King that don't exist in the movie, but whatever. Point is, the reason why I do put Two Towers above the first and the third book, at least for me personally, I guess this is mostly due to the fact that I do consider it to be, honestly, one of those sequel books that is able to, well, I mean, you have to read the first and the third book, obviously, but you can definitely say that this was, I don't even know how to describe it. So, actually, you know what? Now I think about it, I think I might put the in 8s here. again, you kind of have to read all three of these together to kind of get the cohesive narrative. And that is kind of my main criticism. Not that these are bad, trust me, like these are still fantastic books and I still highly recommend you guys read them. Um but I do feel like sometimes it does feel like you do get a bit lost on what exactly is going on. Keep in mind, this is coming from someone who is dyslexic, so do keep that in mind. Because like I guess there's in the sense that there's already like a decent amount of characters that are in here. I mean, of course, you've got Frodo, you've got Gandalf again. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure Boromir wasn't even like, if I remember, he wasn't even in the book, or in the books. He was actually added into the movies, if I remember correctly. I don't know. It's been forever since I've read these, if I'm going to be honest, but I do remember enjoy reading them. So, and as far as I'm concerned, just like The Hobbit, these were very important for world building in this universe. So, I guess that's kind of why I ranked them in A tier. So, that then leads us into The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which this book is kind of seen as more of a joke nowadays. And I mean, I get why, because this is definitely more entailed with a more modern children's book than pretty much every other book that's on here. It's more or less just kind of a side tale about the titular Tom Bombadil, who, for those who don't know, basically is just kind of a mythical figure. He's just kind of a mythical figure in Middle Earth, who just kind of, I guess he's kind of like someone like, think of him as like a mythical figure, kind of like, I don't want to say Santa Claus, because that's not exactly how he is, but he basically brings a lot of good luck, but he also can bring bad luck. Basically, I hate how I have to make this comparison, because I know this is going to make people cringe. Basically, think of him as a much more competent version of Uncle Grandpa. That sounds stupid, I know, but that's basically who he is. And he does actually appear in the book version of Fellowship of the Ring as like a side character, but this is where he kind of gets his own thing. It's mostly just kind of a collection of stories about him, and you can definitely tell that the language is dumbed down. So I don't want to feel like I'm giving this one too much shit, because this one's definitely more in line with being a children's book more than The Hobbit itself. But yeah, if you're interested, I guess check it out, but that's all I gotta really say. And then that leads us into both the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales. So the Silmarillion, you guys have probably heard about quite a bit, but this is essentially this one's essentially another anthology book, but more in a mature tone. And it's basically the book that helps somewhat fills the gaps between some of the plot holes that were in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure this was where we got introduced to some of the major players, like Morgoth and, stuff like Atumo, and expanded on a lot of the other realms of Middle-earth as we know them today. So it's more of a general supplementary piece of a lot of the stuff that was briefly mentioned in the previous books that pretty much established the timeline of Middle-earth. So this was the thing that helped establish the first, second, third, and well, the first, second, and third ages, essentially. Most of this takes place in the second age, with some stuff in the early third age. And I think it's kind of cool. It's not required to read, but it's definitely something that I would recommend. So if that interests you, go check it out. And the Unfinished Tales was essentially the last major release of stuff. It's similar to the Silmarillion in that it is basically another anthology book, except these were stories that J.R.R. Tolkien kind of had in the back of his mind, but unfortunately he would eventually die in I think 1976, I believe. Let me double check that. 1973. So this was published after his death by his son. And so this was basically just kind of a collection of all the stuff that J.R.R. Tolkien had but never fully finished. And in some places you can definitely tell. Again, it's not required to read. Only really check it out if you don't really have anything else to go through, I guess. So that's all I gotta really say. But you know how it goes. But yeah, no, now let's move on to the part that I think most people probably care about. The movies. So let's talk about everyone's favorite movie trilogy of all time. And you guys know how much I love Lord of the Rings. Like, I mean, truth be told, I am going to be honest. I am someone who got to this franchise because of the movies. I'll just straight up say that right here. And you guys should be very well aware how much that the 1978 classics were 10 out of 10s. Go check them out. No debates. No contests. I don't care. They're amazing movies. Okay. You can probably tell by my jesting that these are not the movies that people were looking for. And I probably made everyone riot. Don't worry. I've got an explanation for these movies. And truth be told, most people probably have never even heard of these. Well, so in the late 70s and the early 80s, so around the time when the Unfinished Tales were being, like, around whenever that got published, there were some talks about adapting both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings into full-length featured films. And, well, a little-known company picked up the rights to make full-on adaptations of the books. And it's a little company known as a Rankin Pass. So I heard a gasp, because I if you guys know anything about me, this is a company that is a channel staple, apparently, of my life with this tier list series. Because if that name sounds familiar, you guys know that these are the same people who not only made all of those stop-motion Christmas animated movies back in the 60s and 70s that we did an entire tier list for back in 2021, but they also made Thundercats. So yeah, the Thundercats and the Rudolph Red-Nosed Reindeer people, they made the original Middle-earth trilogy back in the late 70s and the early 80s. So expect a lot of Rankin Bass weirdness. I mean, to be fair, I, I, I I know I feel like I do kind of. I don't want to feel like I'm shitting on Rankin Bass because I don't actually hate the company. As a matter of fact, I'll just straight up be honest with you guys. Their quality is definitely way higher than that of Hanna-Barbera's, because it was either Disney, Hanna-Barbera, or Rankin Bass back in the 70s. Those were your only three options as far as animation is concerned. And these aren't bad movies, but they're definitely movies that I feel like have unfortunately aged kind of poorly in a lot of ways. I mean, at least this first Hobbit movie. This first Hobbit movie is pretty rough. It's pretty rough. I'll give it a D. It's your typical sort of fantasy. It's your typical sort of, kids fantasy movie. You can tell they really tried to Disneyfy this. And I mean, yeah, this started as a children's book, but it just doesn't really work. I mean, to put this in perspective, the way how I feel about this movie is the same way how a lot of people feel about The Black Cauldron by Disney. Granted, I don't despise this movie. It's just not a very good adaptation of the source material. I don't know. I know there's gonna be a lot of 60, 70-year-olds in here. Like, we're gonna be reminiscing about, oh, that's like my favorite movie of all time. And like, I feel bad for being that guy, but like, no. That being said, though, the Lord of the Rings movies that they made, and yes, they made 2 movies though, not 3, not 1. 2, because they adapted it. This is the confusing part. They adapted Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers into one movie, and then they made Return of the King into its own separate movie. Like, what? Yeah, I don't get it. That being said, these aren't terrible movies. As a matter of fact, I'd probably say these are at least a bit better. I'll put them in C, but I'm not putting them in higher. They're not bad. Don't get it twisted. They're not terrible movies. Also, I apologize if you guys hear a dog. I don't know what the hell they're doing over there. They're not terrible, but they're just not great. But that's all I gotta really say. And I feel bad because I feel like I've been shitting on Rankin Bass a lot on this entire series. They're not my villains, by the way. They're not amongst one of my tier list villains. Trust me, they're not that. But it just does kind of represent animation at the time. 70s and 80s animation was just kind of in a very rough period. And it wasn't just Disney. That's all I gotta really say about that. Now let's get into the thing that everyone's actually here for. And that, of course, is the Peter Jackson films. Specifically, the Lord of the Rings trilogy back in the early to mid-2000s. And yes, this is going to be extremely biased from me because all 3 of these movies mean a lot to me. So prepare for me to be extremely biased here. That being said, though, and by the way, we'll start off with Lord of the Rings. We'll start off with the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, and then we'll move on to talk about The Hobbit, because I actually have a lot to say about The Hobbit trilogy. I mean, I have a lot to say about these movies as well, but as far as the 2000s Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, the ones that everyone knows, it should be pretty obvious where I'm putting them. That being said, though, I'm going to put Fellowship, the original, I'm going to put Fellowship of the Ring I'm gonna put this one in A tier, but Two Towers and Return of the King, those are S tiers without a shadow of a doubt. But why do I put Fellowship of the Ring below? Because it's still like, don't get it twisted, it is still like an 8 out of 10 movie. It is still fantastic. I mean, the set design, the use of CGI was not only impressive back then, still looks really good to this day. You can tell I guess you can tell it's a little bit aged, but like it's not distracting whatsoever. I mean, being a pretty decent adaptation of the original book. And I mean, obviously some liberties had to have been made, but even then, the compromises I think were actually for the better. And just being overall a very, very solid cast performance from Elijah Wood. God damn it, I always feel bad when I don't remember the cast, because I feel so bad because I fucking love these movies. Yeah, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, which fucking love. I mean, Christopher Lee is Saruman. I mean, Orlando Bloom is Legolas, but yeah, Billy Boyd is Pippin. Sean Astin as Samwise. I mean, Andy Serkis wouldn't be until the later movies where he would really start to shine as Gollum, but he had a bit of a presence here. So, as far as that's concerned, fantastic. This one, I just feel like, though, you can definitely tell that this was... You can definitely tell Peter Jackson, while he was already a respected director by this point. I mean, he made several other movies throughout the 90s to where he got the repertoire that he did. There's just... You can definitely still tell this is still an early Peter Jackson film in a lot of ways. Like, it's kind of a weird transitionary movie. And I don't know how to describe it. It's a movie that it was in that transitionary period between the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, this came out in 2001, where they were kind of moving away from a lot of the more wider camera angles to a lot of the more close-up shots that would become more popular and a lot more modern movies. Like, basically, camera composition can be a bit awkward in this movie, as far as a film direction standpoint. And I guess it's just also the fact that, and I don't know, it's just one of those movies that's kind of weird to talk about, at least in comparison to the movies that came after this. But regardless, I still highly recommend you guys check out this movie. This is still one of my favorite movies all the time. As a matter of fact, that poster that I can't fucking find for the love of me, it's actually based off this movie. So, go check this movie out. Please. It's worth your time. That being said, though, the sequels, Two Towers and Return of the King, dare I would say, these are my favorite movies of all time. There, I said it. These are my favorite... These movies, in particular, are my two favorite movies of all time. I mean, not only did they build upon what was already a pretty damn good adaptation of the original source material, with, obviously, like I said, some compromises here and there. I mean, they had to change some stuff for Battles of the Helm's Deep to where it was completely Uruk-hai that was there, as opposed to the Uruk-hai and then some of the Dunlendane, which they are still featured in the movie, although they do kind of play a minor role in the movie in comparison to the book. Or even, like I said, in Return of the King, during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where there was another bad guy faction that was mentioned, but they have no appearance in it at all. Like, there's some compromises that were made, but even then, I would still argue that those compromises still made up for the fact, like, the compromises that were made did not sacrifice in the quality of either of these two movies. I mean, again, the set design, the camera angles were definitely improved in both of these movies. The overall tone shifting to it being way more serious than the first one. I guess that was the other issue with Fellowship, is that it did kind of have a bit of a tone. It mixed between two, like, multiple different tones too much. Not to mention the scene where like, fucking Bilbo has that jump scare, which, I mean, I've joked about that scene plenty of times. I don't hate that scene. It just, I don't get it. I get it, but whatever. That was Fellowship. For Two Towers and Return of the King. Okay, let's start with Two Towers. I mean, it's already a massive improvement. I mean, it's a lot more of a grander scale. It's actually showcasing that, well, yeah, this is starting to become a bit of a worldwide scale conflict here. And this should be taken seriously. Not to mention, Andy Serkis's Gollum fucking steals the show in Two Towers, especially. Being sort of this double-edged sort of, creature that knows that they're doing wrong, but at the same time just embraces that, just adding a lot of depth to an already pretty compelling character that was in the original Hobbit. Just adds a lot of just, like, they were able to bring the character to life in a lot of ways that a book could never do. Plus, just a lot plus the fact that this movie takes the 3 hours that it has and is able to perfectly distribute the amount of time between all of the characters' perspectives, between what's going on with Frodo and Sam and Gollum, what's going on with Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn, as well as Gandalf to a certain extent, and what's going on with Merry and Pippin, although not as much. That's probably like the one nitpick that you can say that I can have with this movie. But just overall, a fantastic sequel. And of course, everyone knows about the Battle of Helm's Deep. It's easily one of the best, like, siege battles that has ever been shot. It is so damn good. And it's helped by the fact that they use both a mix of CGI with, makeup for the orcs and the Uruk-hai that are in this movie. Because that's the reason why I do think that CGI in stuff like Lord of the Rings works compared to other movies, because it's used as a supplementary and not a complete crutch throughout the entire movie. And that's something that I highly respect. And even the parts that do use CGI, they're used in scenes that make sense. I mean, using the Ents for the, using CGI for the Ents, that makes sense, because it's kind of hard to do stop motion for something like that. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Two Towers, fantastic. And truth be told, same thing with Return of the King. I mean, this is a movie that honestly was able to flesh out a character that wasn't even really seen until about what, like halfway through the first movie? Aragorn? Maybe not halfway. Yeah, it's about halfway through. And fleshes him out into becoming, in my opinion, my personal favorite character from Lord of the Rings. Like, they gave him that much of an arc throughout, I mean, obviously all three of these movies, but especially this movie as well. That's why he's the main thing right here, because he's arguably the second main character of the movie alongside Frodo. Which, of course, speaking of, just the scenes. I'm not going to spoil this movie in particular for you guys, because I want you guys to watch it for yourselves if you haven't already. But if you know, you know. That being said, I do know one complaint that people do have about this movie is the last 20 minutes of the movie. I know people complain about that all the time. But, like, you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of characters that are in this movie that you want to make sure has something for them. Again, I'm being very broad, by the way. I don't want to spoil anything, but you guys get the point. Or for those who are watching this who haven't seen these movies. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that's as big of an issue as some people make it out to be. And besides, it's made up for by, like I said, fleshing out Aragorn's character to being at the top of his game by this point, and the interactions between Sam and Frodo by this point in this, it's pretty, it hits home a lot, especially for me. And even just the, like, general composition of, well, the music, but also just the cinematography, the soundtrack, and the fight choreography in this. So, and, well, as far as I'm concerned as well, not too bad of a female empowerment message, surprisingly enough. So, which I know that will get a certain crowd fucking pissed off, but those people are idiots. But you guys get my point. Point is, fantastic movie all around. I see why this movie won tons of awards back in the day. It is easily one of the best movies of all time. And, like I said, is basically my favorite movie of all time. And that's saying a lot because, I mean, you guys know how much I fucking love, you know, Star Wars, specifically Revenge of the Sith. That was one of the first movies I remember seeing in theaters, by the way, as a small kid. Man, a part of me kind of wishes I also saw Lord of the Rings in theaters, but unfortunately, I was just too young. Like, even if I was with my guardians, they wouldn't have allowed us in the theater at that time. So that is a bit unfortunate, but I just imagine watching this movie for the first time in theaters. So, God. But yeah, I know I'm gushing, but these are honestly my favorite movies of all time. And truth be told, they helped me get into fantasy and mean a lot to me. As a matter of fact, if I haven't already on my wiki, I think I already put them in my tripartite, which basically, for those who don't know, is the term that I coined to describe everything that is impacted me in my life. And truth be told, these three movies in particular impacted me a lot. And so I have to thank Peter Jackson and everyone who's worked on these movies for not only introducing me to, well, even the books here and all the video games down here, but even just making a part of who I am. Because if I didn't like if I never got into Lord of the Rings, I probably wouldn't have gotten into Warhammer back there. surprisingly enough. Or Final Fantasy, or Elder Scrolls, or pretty much any other fantasy thing. Except for maybe Wizard 101. Because that was kind of before. That was kind of before, but that's besides the point. So, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, if there's anything to take away from this tier list, go watch these 3 movies. You will not regret it. That being said, though, that then leads us into the next movie trilogy, the Hobbit trilogy. Now, these were made 9 to 11 years after Return of the King. So 2012 to 2014. So these are kind of difficult movies to talk about because most people, funny enough, at least from what I can tell, actually do like these movies. Yeah, let me look up like the reviews for at least Unexpected Journey. Yeah, like it has an 83%. At least from the audience score. Yeah, like with the first Hobbit movie. And I'm pretty sure the second one has an even bigger score. Or at least it's... Yeah, it has an 85. But the thing is that these are movies that I noticed YouTubers really fucking despise for whatever reason. And I genuinely do not understand. Well, I think I know why. And unfortunately, it has nothing to do with this. But you guys notice how I've been mentioning Star Wars a lot recently, right? Well, there's a reason for that. I think people treat the Hobbit trilogy, or at least currently, the same way that for the longest time people treated the prequel trilogy from Star Wars. And I'm gonna straight up be honest with you guys, it is not this. You cannot compare these trilogies together. They have kind of a similar... Some people might say they have a similar problem to them in the sense that Peter Jackson may have gone a bit overboard with some of the ideas. At the same time, though, if I'm going to be honest, these are or at least 2 out of these 3 movies, they're not bad at all. As a matter of fact, I'd say 2 of these movies are actually still really good on their own. I mean, I will definitely say this, though. They depart quite a bit from the book. They depart, actually, as a matter of fact, a lot from the book. I mean, the general plot is still here intact. I mean, you still follow Bilbo as he goes across the entire realm to a mountain to potentially face off against a giant dragon. I mean, that general plot line is still there, but they added in... Like, in these movies, they added in an orc side plot, where they were only really seen twice in this book, yet they're stretched out throughout both of these movies. But if I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually hate that in concept. But let's talk about it. So, why do I say that the 2 out of these 3 movies are good? Well, I mean, I might as well rank them now. So, the first Hobbit movie, Unexpected Journey. I'm going to put this one in a B tier. The Desolation of Smog. I know this is going to piss off a certain part of the... certain part of YouTube. I'm gonna put this in A tier. So, like, there's the hate. Yep. There you go. That being said, to appease them, I am gonna put this one in D tier. Okay, let's discuss this. So, first of all, unexpected journey. So again, this was something that was extremely controversial at the time, and trust me, I remember because I was becoming a teenager by the time that these movies came out. And hell, I'm pretty sure. I saw these movies in theaters. I saw all three of them in theaters, actually. So, and keep in mind, I actually did read this copy that I'm holding for you guys right before before the movie came out. Or I used the audiobook, whatever. And so I was basically hyping myself up, but there was a lot of controversy from a lot of people saying that, why is this being a trilogy? It's just one book. There's only so much you can do. They're partially right. I think An Unexpected Journey, and we'll talk about Desolation of Smaug in a little bit, I think both of these movies do work in the sense that these are pretty much the two movies you could argue were able to tell the tale of the Hobbit in its most intact form as you can. Because with An Unexpected Journey, basically it adapts, and I'd say about like half the book into this movie. And so it goes all the way up until after the orc attack. And so it adapts the scenes where they had to deal with the trolls, where they're in the goblin cave. I mean, Gollum, of course. And it's a decent adaptation. I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect. As a matter of fact, my major complaint about this movie is that this is a movie that really, really wanted to be a musical. People do tend to forget that, because there are certain scenes with the dwarves where they just cut off to them singing, which was very bizarre. I mean, yeah, there are lyrics written inside of the book here, but I mean, they're just lyrics. You don't really know what the songs were supposed to sound like. And so it kind of does make it a bit awkward at points. So that's something that I really did not like. Not that I dislike musicals, because I do like musicals, but them trying to make this in like a pseudo musical just rubbed me the wrong way. Also, unfortunately, this is unfortunately just kind of a bit of a problem with a lot of movies from around this time. So remember when I mentioned the CGI thing with the Lord of the Rings movies? Well, let's just say that they relied a lot more on CGI in this movie, specifically for the trolls, for the goblins, and even for the orcs themselves, which that was a big mistake if you ask me, because the orcs in the Lord of the Rings trilogy that Peter Jackson worked on, those were actual actors that they put up like makeup for them, and they looked real. And, well, this is going to piss off the Warhammer and Warcraft fan base, but if I'm going to be honest, I actually prefer Peter Jackson orcs than I do Warhammer and Warcraft orcs. There's the hate again. But anyways, that's a whole other discussion that I don't want to have right now. But my point is that they looked really good on their own as like this sort of mutated former elf thing. Like, you could tell that they used to probably, like, they were twisted with black magic. And you can definitely tell them just fully making them CG in this movie, you can tell was a bit of a downgrade. At least for the orcs. The goblins in this movie, I think, actually look fine. As a matter of fact, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think them having the goblins CGI actually works more in favor, but making the orcs CGI was not the correct route, because a lot of them do look really stupid. I'm just gonna be frank. I mean, the Azog, the main antagonist orc, is kind of... He just doesn't look that good. I don't know, that's just me, though. Although, to be fair, I don't know how you'd be able to make his, his little, like, thing stick out, but whatever. It's, so yeah, like, there's some missteps that this movie unfortunately takes. That being said, though, Martin Freeman as as Bilbo, perfect casting for this movie. No complaints there. Like, I don't know if there's anyone else who could have been casted as Bilbo better than him. So, Peter Jackson, congratulations. You actually got really good casting for Bilbo here. And that extends into, well, the riddle scene, which, dare I say, as far as the Hobbit trilogy adapting the source material, that's easily the best adaptation of that scene you can probably get inside of any sort of film. So, yeah. That being said, though, like I said, it's a flawed movie. It has its problems. I think it relies too much on CGI, and it does take some questionable liberties on some of the source material, as well as some weird musical tracks. At the same time, though, it is still a pretty decent movie. I still recommend you guys check it out. And then we've got Desolation of Smog, which, like, I keep having to pick up this book. Basically covers most of the second half of the original book. So this is pretty much them going from post goblin orc attack all the way up into Smog himself. And yeah, this is definitely a better movie, I would say. It still does have the problem with the orcs looking a bit off, though, in certain scenes. That, and also the fact that they shoehorn Legolas in here. I will admit, I am not the biggest fan of that. But if I'm going to be honest, everything else that they did in this movie, I think was still pretty good for the most part. I mean, Mark Wood in this looks, in my opinion, looks pretty fantastic in a lot of ways, as well as the lake town itself. I mean, the encounter between Bilbo and Smog, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch. God, I can never pronounce his name. I thought was also a pretty good scene. Not as good as the exchange between Bilbo and Gollum from the previous movie, but still pretty good in its own right. I'd say the choreography for the most part was also still pretty good in this movie. If a bit different, I'll say. And I don't know, this movie, it's kind of weird because it kind of has a bit of a clinic, rustic look to it, which I know that's contradictory sounding, but it's, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of, I think just the general look of this movie is what kind of captivates me here. And I'll even admit this right now. I think I might as well have to address the biggest elephant in the room about this movie, because this is, I think, probably the biggest complaint that I know from this movie. The Dol Guldur subplot. Now, this is something that a lot of people really fucking hated, as far as I'm concerned. For those like it was loosely touched upon in the previous movie, but it does take center stage here. And hot take, I actually don't mind the inclusion of it at all. Okay. This is not going to be a popular stream, I am very well aware. But okay, let me explain. I'm not going to spoil this for you guys because, again, I'd rather you guys watch it for yourselves. But the thing about this movie is that the Dol Guldur subplot, it basically does explain admittedly kind of a weird plot hole that I didn't even really think about until years later from the Lord of the Rings movies. Because, I mean, a lot of people at the time thought it was like, oh, it's a shoehorn to try to tie in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. I don't actually see it like that. As a matter of fact, like I said, it does explain, admittedly, kind of a massive plot hole from the original, like from the Lord of the Rings movies, and even just, admittedly, kind of the books themselves, that I didn't actually really think about. So, again, I don't want to get into spoilers for it. So, and by the way, I should have mentioned this. This is a spoilers-free tier list, so you don't have to worry about me talking about spoilers. So, I think it was just the fact that, I think part of the problem was the fact that I think these movies, I think, were just released too early. Like, if these were released closer to nowadays, I think people would be fine with them. But because this movie came out literally 10 years after Return of the King, it just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So, but that being said, I still think I don't know. I might be alone on that opinion. I actually don't know general consensus. That being said, though, it does look like general consensus does agree with me, at least as far as this movie being the best out of the Hobbit trilogy. So, I mean, that's all I gotta really say. It's still a good movie. I get why people want to shit on this movie, but I don't think a lot of that is done in good faith. As a matter of fact, if I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the criticisms that I see from both Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smaug, I think a lot of it does come from bad faith. Like, there's a lot of bad faith criticism of both of these movies that I've seen online, and it actually does piss me off, which is unfortunate. So, because I do think these are still really good movies. But notice that I said it's a trilogy, and then I mentioned that 2 out of these 3 movies are good. Let's talk about Battle of Five Armies. Okay, so I gotta be real with you guys. This one's kind of a rough movie in a lot of ways, and unfortunately, it is kind of hard to defend. I mean, first of all, it's literally adapting the last 20 pages of this book. There's only so much you can do to stretch out a 2-hour movie for that, which, by the way, out of all 6 of the Peter Jackson movies, this is the shortest one. Gee, I wonder why. And unfortunately, this is unfortunately where the Hobbit trilogy broke. I can defend the first 2 movies, but I cannot for this. So, remember when I said about the Hobbit book, that basically it was J.R.R. Tolkien using his own universe as a surrogate for him to shit on World War One, on how it was just, such a terrible, pointless, stupid battle, or stupid war with that, but of course, battle with the Battle of the Five Armies. Yeah, basically, this is a movie that misses the entire point of that whole part of the book. And it's honestly, it's so bad. Like, it brings out the worst elements of the CGI of the Hobbit trilogy up until this point. Like, the orcs still look pretty bad in this movie. They also have another goblin tribe that comes in, which, I mean, that's kind of like an interesting. Oh, and by the way, you want to know why it's called the Battle of Five Armies, at least in the context of the movie? Well, you got 5 armies. You got the elves, the dwarves, and the lakeside and like the lake town humans versus the Gundabad orcs led by Azog, and then this random ass goblin tribe that just so happens to join in, who, by the way, were not in the original book. It was originally 2 separate orc armies, not a goblin army. But that's besides the point. Point is, it basically, like, you can tell they are really stretching out the time. They have to add in like 5 separate side plots throughout this entire movie. One of which is this annoying motherfucker. I don't even remember his name. He's like the advisor to the former ruler of Lake Town. Like, this fucking god. This guy pisses me off in this movie. Like, not to mention, he just straight up, he may or may not be transphobic in hindsight. Which, I mean, that's a great sign for a movie back in 2014, by the way. God. So, I mean, there's that. There's also the dragon sickness side plot, which just comes out of fucking nowhere, by the way. That's not a thing that is not a thing in the book at all. That's just something that they just kind of shoehorned. I mean, it was mentioned in the first movie, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere at the beginning of this movie. Not to mention that the fight scenes, wow, you can tell they were rushed, because half of the fight scenes in this movie are just straight up. See, like, people like to complain about the prequel trilogy about those movies relying a lot on CGI. At least they didn't do it for the lightsaber scenes. Well, except for in Attack of the Clones with Yoda, and I guess Revenge of the Sith. But even then, the choreography in those, guess what? Those are way better than they are in this movie. It's that bad, people. It's bad. So, and I saw this in theaters too. Like, I was excited about this because I just turned it. Like, I'm pretty sure I just was in high school by the time this movie came out, and my middle school did a fucking play based off of The Hobbit. They were writing off the hype of this shit. Like, this pissed me. Like, God. So, you can probably tell, I really do not like this movie. It's a bad movie. I'm just gonna be frank about it. The only thing redeeming it is that it still at least does have the look and feel of the other Peter Jackson films. Like, the not the choreography. The cinematography is still there. The The costume department still really did a fantastic job, especially for those like elf and dwarf designs. I think the most insulting part about this movie, though, is despite being called The Hobbit, Bilbo's barely in this movie. I want to put this movie in F tier, but I can't, because there's unfortunately something that is worse than this. And I'll get to that in a second. But as far as I'm concerned, this is the worst Peter Jackson movie. Well, worst Peter Jackson Middle-earth movie. It's bad. And it's pointless. It's a pointless movie. Why? Whatever. So, yeah. That is why the Hobbit trilogy unfortunately has the reputation that it does. It's because of this fucking movie. This is the movie, which is why you see people shit the entire trilogy. And it's like, no, it's not a bad trilogy. It has one bad movie in it. It's kind of funny enough, it's kind of a reverse problem that I have with the prequels from Star Wars. Because I think Phantom Menace is just straight up a boring ass film. And Attack of the Clones, I think it's just fine. You know, it's okay. It's like 5 out of 10. And then Revenge of this is like fucking amazing. It's kind of a reverse problem where you have two, like, with the Star Wars prequels, you kind of had two to really bad movies and one really good movie. The Hobbit trilogy, you have two good movies here, and then one that's just not good. That's pretty bad. So yeah, no, this movie blows. That being said, though, we are not quite done when it comes to cinematic releases, because we got 2 left. Although technically one of them is not really, one of them's not a movie; it's actually a TV show. But let's talk about them anyways, and then we'll talk about the video games. So, in 2022, the world was blessed, in air quotes, with the release of a Lord of the Rings TV show based off of the Second Age. So it takes a lot of inspiration from the Silmarillion, as well as the Untold Stories. It's called Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. A pseudo-alliterative name, I know. So this was exclusively on the Amazons. And I will admit, hearing about a Lord of the Rings TV show, when it first came out, I was actually somewhat excited about it, because you guys know I love Lord of the Rings. And, well, we're doing a tier list, of course! So, I fucking love Lord of the Rings, and to hear that it's technically it's another prequel, but it explores sort of the beginnings of the forging of the rings. I think that's pretty dope in concept, especially if we're talking about the original timeline of the Númenóreans, which, for those who don't know, is like an ancient race of humans who lived in Middle-earth, but they were just kind of, their kingdom was wiped out at some point. It's kind of vague as to what happened, but like they basically think of them as like, no, I guess they're not really like the Forerunners from Halo, because they're not like advanced technology-wise, but they were basically just superhumans, essentially. I guess, think of them as like Stormcast Eternal from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I think that's the best comparison I can make to Númenóreans. So yeah, like, they were essentially, so having a show based off of Númenor and the origins of the rings, the titular rings in Lord of the Rings. That's awesome. This has got to be one of the most insulting TV shows I have ever watched. It is bad, people. It's really, really bad. So bad, in fact. I mean, it's F tier easily. This is our first F tier. I can't defend this shit. So, okay. Why is it F tier? Well, first of all, they have characters that existed hundreds of years apart working together. Yeah, they just take a lot of the characters from the Silmarillion and the Untold Stories, and they just, just have them side by side working together, despite the fact that they are quite literally not supposed to be in the same time frame. It may even be distant ancestors in some cases. So, already just warped timeline. Not even like doing creative liberty. It's just straight up just fucking with the timeline at this point. So, off to a great start, by the way. Also, at least for the first season, because this TV show got a second season fucking somehow. Well, this was a more of an origin story of Sauron, which is not a bad idea. It's just the problem is that they almost completely change his backstory. So, yeah. And keep in mind, this was around the time when Melkor. By the way, I said Morgoth. That's not what I meant from earlier. I meant to say Melkor. This was fairly recently after Melkor was defeated. Because the thing is that, well, Sauron was a follower, the follower of Melkor. And that's not really touched upon, like, at all. Not to mention, it's one of those shows that unfortunately is a bit of an idiot plot. Basically, things that you can see coming from a mile away ends up happening, but the characters don't realize that. That is something that has always annoyed the fuck out of me. Because it's like, you see there's an orc army being forged in, like, the Southlands. Why aren't you doing anything about that? Like, and they also make out the king and the prince guy, if you guys remember the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, the king and the prince, like, who fight Sauron at the beginning of that movie, they appear in this show. They make them out to be complete dickheads in this show. Like, actually the biggest pieces of shit you can actually think of. So, and also, the dwarf subplot, while not terrible, it's also just kind of confusing because they have like a random distrust of humans all of a sudden because of some random dwarf that died in a mine shaft. And not only because of that, but also that makes it because of one guy who died, they're like, no more mining in the mine. Dwarves who mine in the mines no longer mine in the mines. No more. Because of one guy. We are dwarfs, but we do not mind. I'm sorry. They didn't say that exactly. I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. Oh, by the way, that's not even the worst part of this entire show. The worst fucking part are the fucking Harfoots. Don't even get me started on those motherfuckers. Terrible, terrible people. Horrible people, as a matter of fact. I mean, dude, the Harfoots, which were basically, for those who don't know, they're kind of your shoe. They're kind of your shoe-in for hobbits for this, because again, they want to try to fucking tie in everything from the movies into this. Even though Harfoots are more of a subspecies related to hobbits, but they're not actually hobbits. But whatever. Their whole shtick is they're trying to find a new land to migrate and settle in. And they're like, no one left behind. Unless if you're in the back of the caravan, which, good luck. Where if you get sent to the back of the caravan, that's kind of like your punishment. And if you go behind, well, fuck you. Oh, and also, one of their own kin was murdered by bees, and they made that out as a joke. I am not joking when I say that. They literally laughed at one of their own kind because they were stung to death by bees or wasps, what the fuck. And they laughed at that shit. They're horrible people. Horrible people. So yeah, no. I'm sorry, but like this, I know in shit like Warhammer, stuff like that would be treated as a joke. But here's the thing. Lord of the Rings is not a grimdark universe. That's not even grimdark. That's just straight up fucking cruel and cringe. So yeah, no, fuck the Harfoots. Or I mean, fuck that whole subplot. You know what? Only spoiler I'm gonna bring up. I'm happy their village fucking burned. They fucking deserve that shit. So yeah, no. Actually a terrible adaptation of two sources that are highly revered in a lot of people's hearts. I know I didn't put the Silmarillion and I didn't put the Untold, like the unfinished stories. I didn't put them high here, but they are still highly respected sources for this universe. And the fact that they just tried to, I don't even know what they were trying to do. They just fucked it up with bad writing and not even getting the lore correct. Which I know there were some, like I said, the Peter Jackson films, they took some liberties. I get that. That is not an excuse to do full-on revisionist changes for no reason. So, yeah, no, F tier. Easily F tier. It's not even close. So, yeah. I mean, this is something that I was talking about with Goldie and Saimori recently. Why is it that it's always the adaptations of shit that I like that end up being the worst things ever? I mean, between this and the Halo show from Paramount Plus, like, why? I don't know, man. Shit's bad. That then leads us into the last, non-video game here, which is War of the Rohirrim. So this just came out last month. So it's a fairly new release. So I will admit this is probably the hardest thing for me to be able to judge and rank on this list because it's still fairly new. It's like a month and a half old. That being said, though, even I can tell this is not going to be a movie that's going to age well. It's not a terrible movie. Trust me when I say this. It's at least better than Battle of the Five Armies. But unfortunately, it's just a movie that you can tell was more of a budget movie that they outsourced a studio for. And that sucks. Because this is essentially, or at least it was advertised, to basically be basically Lord of the Rings anime. Which that sounds fucking cool, right? I mean, Star Wars did... I am comparing this too much to Star Wars. I am so sorry. These are two franchises that mean a lot to me in my heart. It's hard for me not to compare both of them, despite the fact that they're two different genres. But an anime based off of the writers of Rohan. That sounds fucking cool, right? And in some aspects, it kind of is. Unfortunately, though, the animation is extremely stiff. And the writing, it's just weak. There's it's kind of a basic plot where it's just Rohan versus the Dunlendane, which I do like that they do focus on the Dunlendane because they were kind of like a small, side thing in the Two Towers. They were a much bigger thing in the original book. So they did at least give them a bit more of a focus. And since this is a part of the Peter Jackson timeline, it is technically a prequel of sorts to the movies. So that's kind of cool. I just think it's a damn shame that they didn't really do anything with it. That being said, though, funny enough, I'm going to put this in the same tier as I did with the Lord of the Rings adaptations for Rankin Bass. I'm going to put this in a C tier. It's not bad, but it's fine. That's all I gotta really say. Oh my god, we finally reached the video games. So, how I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna divide them up into different groups. So, I'm gonna do the 90s games first, and then I'll do the first half of the 2000s, and then the second half of the 2000s, and then the early to mid 2010s games, and then Shadow of Mordor onwards, if that makes sense. So let's start off with the early 90s adaptations of both Fellowship and the Two Towers for PC. So these were PC. Oh, and then also fucking Super Nintendo, because it's a different game. I'll put both of these in C tier, but I'm putting the Super Nintendo game in F. I actually don't really have much to say about the original DOS PC games here. I mean, they're just kind of decent little DOS RPG action adventure games. They're fine. Again, these are games from way before my time, and so because it should be pretty obvious, and so because of that, I don't really have much to say on them. Other than, I mean, they're just kind of I don't really call them Ultimate but Lord of the Rings, but kinda in that similar vein. So if you like Ultimate, I guess you can like these games. But this Super Nintendo port, actually, it's not even really a port. It's a completely different game compared to the DOS version of this. Yeah, Lord of the Rings, Volume 1, which implies that there's a second or even a third volume, which there never was, by the way. Oh my god, it is bad. It is completely... It's one of those types of... It's a where the fuck do I go kind of game. It's one of those games where it just doesn't tell you shit. And this is on a Super Nintendo, by the way, which you would think by then they would not be doing any of that shit. Nope. It's still confusing as an NES game. And this came out in 1994, which was a really damn good year. If you've seen our Caspian Game Awards show, which makes this even more insulting. Not to mention, character models look so weird. I mean, obviously this is pre-Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, so obviously it's going to be a bit more cartoony. But even then, honestly, in some ways, I'd rather take the Reagan Bass designs over a lot of the sprites that they took in here. This is a bad adaptation. And borderline broken controls. So yeah, don't play this. Don't play this. So yeah, no. Stupid. Alright, let's get into the actual games. Or at least, well, somewhat actual games. And funny enough, we've actually talked about some of these before, also on our Caspian Game Awards show. Although very briefly. But I am also still going to be brief with most of these, so do keep that in mind. So, the PlayStation 2 movie tie-in games. Okay, well, this first one's actually not technically a tie-in game. It's still based off of Fellowship of the Ring, but it's not based off the movie version. It's based off the book. So, it kind of like this PC version and Super Nintendo version. This one follows the book. And truth be told, this is definitely the best adaptation of that movie, at least. I am still going to give it a B, though. But these are the Lord of the Rings games. And this might come as a surprise from you guys. I'm going to put these in A tier. War of the Ring, which is kind of a RTS. I'll put that one in C. This fucking Hobbit game, I'm putting this shit in F. And Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, A tier. Or this is a difficult one. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, we'll put it in B for now. So, yeah, this might surprise you guys. Okay, but let's first talk about this game. This is actually kind of one of those weird, random games that, again, it was an adaptation, but it wasn't based off the movie. It was based off the original book. So, as a matter of fact, I actually do own most of these games. Most of the PS2 games, except for the Hobbit game, because that game sucks ass. Right here. So, yeah, this game. Funny enough, I found this for like only $20. I thought it would be way more expensive than that, because this is a game that I just never really hear about. But yeah, it's basically just kind of an action-adventure game where it takes a lot more from the books. It does have some loose, light elements that have some inspiration from the movies, but it is not the core of this game. And it's just fine. If you like just kind of more... If you like Zelda-likes... I mean, this is basically just a Zelda clone. That's all I can really say. But these two games right here, which, I mean, I already am someone who does like... Oh, shoot, sorry. I'm someone who already does like the movies that these games are based off of. So, admittedly, there is a bit of a bias, but even then, I would argue that these are some of the few movies licensed games that aren't Star Wars that are actually really damn good. These are more of a hack and slash style. So yeah, you mostly play as Aragorn, although you can swap between Legolas and Gimli. even I think Gandalf in this game. So, oh yeah, and yeah, all the other characters. Sorry, it's been a while since I played these games. I still have the things. I still have the tags on them. I should probably take those off. But yeah, no, these games, I played them. I will admit, I did get them fairly recently. I mean, that's why I still have the tags on them. And I think that these games, as far as movie adaptations are concerned, these are actually, I would argue, are some of the better ones from that era. Because movie licensed video games do get a bit of a fucking... They have a bad reputation of being pretty bare bones compared to more original pieces. And it's because they're just cashing in on a new release. I mean, we've seen this a lot from that decade. I grew up in that era where there were just so many video games based off of random ass movies, and they all mostly sucked, except for these games. Because thankfully these games were surprisingly a lot more in depth than you would think. So, and something else that was pretty special about a lot of these earlier Peter Jackson based Lord of the Rings video games is something that you probably already saw while I was showcasing them. And okay, yeah, I'll clean that later. And it's this thing right here. So this is something that is a lot more common with a lot of sports games. It's basically, yeah, it's basically like a little stamp that showcases that this is actually officially licensed by Warner Brothers themselves. So I don't know if you can see, it says official Lord of the Rings product. Yeah, it's kind of hard with the, because I'm pretty sure these are Chrome. So that's pretty cool. And well, I mean, these are, and here's the weirdest thing about these games, and pretty much the rest of the games from the 2000s. Yeah, I know, it's weird praising Electronic Arts outside of Battlefield, but yeah, these are decent games. Go check these. Go check both of these out if you haven't. And then that leads us into War of the Ring. It's an RTS. Kind of a standard one though. And it's not even the best RTS on this tier list. So it's fine. It is kind of finicky though. Also, similar to this Fellowship of the Ring game, it's more based off the books rather than the movies. So there is a bit of a disparity there, but it's fine. You know, I'm not gonna pretend it's like the best RTS ever. So, yeah. And then we got this fucking Hobbit game. Stop pretending this game is good, because it's not. It's terrible. And I know that because I remember playing this at my cousin's house, because they owned this for a while. It was terrible. I mean, the cover alone should tell you. The cover alone should tell you, people. I don't even want to acknowledge this game. This game sucks. Let's move on. So, let's move on to another actually good game. And that's the Third Age, which, if you guys remember, this was one of our nominees for the best role-playing game for 2020 or 2004. And yeah, this one is actually kind of another one that I think is a pretty interesting little experiment, because whereas this game is basically kind of a Zelda clone, this is a Final Fantasy X clone. And I mean, Final Fantasy X is highly revered in a lot of people's eyes. And basically having a Final Fantasy Lord of the Rings game, I think it works. The biggest problem is the fact that I do feel like this game does tie a bit too closely to the films. Because, yeah, despite the fact that it is showing that these are original characters, yes, these are actually, like, new characters here. So, you got not Gandalf, you got not Aragorn, you got not Legolas, got not Gimli. Like, it's kind of stupid, I'm not gonna lie. Like, easily the worst part of this game is easily the plot. The gameplay is really solid. And even just exploring the world, and going into the combat, I don't know, I just think this game, it just really holds up in that respect. So, go at least seek out a copy if you can. It's available on Xbox, GameCube, and PlayStation 2. I just picked up the PS2 version since that's my baby console. But, yeah. I'd recommend you guys check it out. Alright, and then that gets us into the second half of the 2000s, which I kind of forgot to do Battle for Middle-earth because that came out in 2004, but whatever. Okay. Battle for Middle-earth. I'll put this in B tier. Tactics. I'll put this also in C tier. Battle for Middle-earth 2, though. Oh, okay. Do I want to put this? I'll put this in A tier. I don't want to put it too high. Lord of the Rings Online. I'll put this in B tier. And then Lord of the Rings Conquest. This is another game that is very contentious with people. I don't think it's that bad. I'll put it in B tier, but let me explain. So, Battlefield Middle-earth 1 is also an RTS, but it is basically an improvement in every single way compared to War of the Ring. It has a lot more of a fleshed out movement set. It has actual characters that people recognize. And it did expand on some of the aspects that weren't even brought up in the movies. Because, yes. Which, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention, Third Age, this is also canon in the Peter Jackson universe. The Peter Jackson version. So I forgot to mention that. This game is as well. And yeah, I think this one is pretty cool. It does have some missteps that make it to where I don't think it's as good as its sequel, which we'll briefly touch upon in a second. But I do think that is a game that, if you guys can find it online, go check it out. Lord of the Rings Tactics is a game that I don't really have much to say about it. Basically, if you like Mega Man Battle Network, that's essentially what this game is. But Lord of the Rings themed. So, and also fully 3D, because this was I don't think this was a launch PSP game, but it definitely came out the year that it dropped. But yeah, that's all I gotta really say. It's okay. And then we got Battle for Middle-earth 2, which I've talked about this game before. As a matter of fact, I actually streamed it several years ago. I like this game. Actually, funny enough, I do own this game physically. Unfortunately for me, though, it is not the PC version. It is the Xbox 360 version. Although this is still a decent way to play, unfortunately, it does end up getting pretty laggy at points. But nonetheless, this is a vast improvement, even compared to Battle for Middle-earth 1. Added in some new factions. The Wrath of the Lich King, or Wrath of the Witch King, excuse me, expansion. Pretty solid in its own right. And I don't know, just I think I really do like these games specifically because, funny enough, these were made by the same people who made Command and Conquer, as well as Medal of Honor. Yeah, EA Los Angeles, also known as Danger Close Studios. They made this game, and I like Command and Conquer, so naturally. Although, actually, no, I played this before I played Command and Conquer. Funny enough. So yeah, no, in a weird way, this got me into Command and Conquer. So yeah, it's essentially just that, but with 6 factions instead of just 2 or 3, which, in my opinion, should be like the bare minimum. I guess 4 should be like the bare minimum for any game, like number of factions in a game. You got the humans, you got the elves and the dwarves as the good guys, and then you got the not really Mordor, just kind of more of the followers of Melkor, because it includes Mordor, Harad, Easterlings, all that fun stuff, and goblins and the Uruk-hai as the bad guys. And then Wrath of the Witch King includes Angmar as another bad guy faction, which is pretty cool. And I just think it's a solid RTS. Though I will definitely say the PC version is definitely the superior version, although the Xbox 360 version is not too bad. So go check it out. And then we got Lord of the Rings Online. So this came out during that era where there were a bunch of MMORPGs that were released that was following on that World of Warcraft pie. And this one, I give this one a bit of a pass because it's an IP that I like. I'm gonna be honest, that's pretty much the only reason why. And surprisingly, it's still going strong to this day. Special servers, as of 2025, January 2025, they're still up as far as I'm concerned. So the fact that the game is still going as strong as it has been, that's pretty awesome. Granted, again, more based off of the books rather than Peter Jackson. So do keep that. So do keep that in mind. Though in recent years they've been tying more of the Peter Jackson stuff into it. I guess I don't know. MMOs are just kind of difficult for me to rank because I don't play MMOs as often anymore because of just how much time they take in. But this was one that I thought was pretty interesting. So go check it out. And then we got Lord of the Rings Conquest, a game that I am well aware that a lot of people do not like. And that is a shame, because I see why. Because for those who don't know, Lord of the Rings Conquest, and this has been the theme of this tier list, was made by Pandemic Studios, which, if that name sounds familiar, they made Star Wars Battlefront, the original versions. And you guys know how much I love Star Wars Battlefront 2, 2005. That's in my top 3 favorite games of all time. And so to see them basically do that, but a Lord of the Rings version of that, is pretty awesome. And in some ways, it actually is. I think the unit variety is as good as you can get for a game like this. It does suck that they only have 4 units instead of 6, or 4 classes instead of 6. So you have the warrior, the archer, the rogue, and the wizard. And I mean, that pretty much sounds like as it is. And instead of it being a shooter, it is more of a hack and slash. Because, I mean, there's no guns in Lord of the Rings. So what do you do instead? Well, swords, bows, daggers, sorcery. So, and I think as far as that's concerned, I think they did as a good enough of a job as they could do. It's just the problem is that there is just not enough content in the game. There's way too little maps in this for it to be any enjoyment after a few hours. And not to mention, some of the units that they do, like some of the factions and units that they ended up choosing for some of these areas are kind of questionable, especially on the Pelennor fields, because they have it to where they have one of the Mumakil Harad guys as the warrior, an orc as the wizard, and then Easterlings as the archer and the rogue. Which, I don't know about you, but that doesn't really make any sense if you've seen the movies. Because how I would have done that is I would have had the Harad guys with like the face coverings. I would have had those as the archers, because you see them carry bows in the fucking movie. Why did you guys choose Harad for the archers and then the Easterlings for the swords? I know they carried pikes and 2 towers, but like that makes more. I know that's like the smallest thing you can complain about those games, and I know Star Wars Battlefront 2 does unfortunately have some weird shit like that too, where the developers just chose actual named characters as just general like basic ass units in that game. But whatever. My point is that there's some questionable, weird design choices that they decided with that game, and like I said, some of the there's just not enough maps for it to fully justify. And the worst part about it is that it is not even mod compatible either, or at least not to my knowledge. I'm gonna check ModDB to see if there's any sort of mods they can find of it, but I didn't really find anything worth of note. Yeah, there's no. The game has like little to no mod support, so you're stuck with like the 8 or 9 maps that are in the game, which is pretty pitiful, if I'm gonna be honest. That being said, though, the core of the game I still think is pretty fun, and the fact that you can actually play as most of the major characters I can think of off the top of my head in the game is pretty awesome. So, not a complete failure as some people make it out to be, but definitely a disappointment in some areas. Alright, the early 2010s games. Yeah, I'm taking a sip because some of these games are going to be a bit of a doozy to talk about. Alright, Aragorn's Quest, F. Not a shadow of a doubt. War in the North. Also controversial, but I'm going to put this in a B tier. Guardians of Middle-earth, D tier. Lego, The Lord of the Rings, A tier. And Lego The Hobbits. It's a dumb name, B tier. Okay, so Aragorn's Quest, it was just a random ass cash grab game, which the dumb part about this game is that it basically it's another retelling of the movies. But the problem is that it was released on the same system as these 2 games. Yeah, no, this was a super late PlayStation 2 release. It also had a PS3 and an Xbox 360 and a Wii port, but whatever. The fact that it was released on the same system as these games. Pointless! Don't spend your money on this game. It's bad. So, yeah, like, it's pointless. Not to mention, I'm pretty sure this was one of those games that has a lot of bugs in it. So, yeah, you're basically just getting an inferior product. So, don't bother. Now, War in the North. This is another one that is pretty contentious, as far as I am concerned, and yes, I do own a physical copy of the game. So, 360 version this time. And this is similar to the Third Age in that it is it is a hack and slash RPG. Okay, well, it's an RPG, but it also is a hack and slash. So it's more of a it's an action RPG, and it pretty much follows, well, another group of, heroes as they pretty much fight a lot of the conflicts that are going on in the northern part of Middle Earth. And as a piece of lore that tries to expand upon stuff beyond the Lonely Mountain, and is kind of set. It's set in the same time frame as the movies, because yes, this is another canon game in the Peter Jackson universe. I think it did fine. It is definitely inferior to Third Age, at least in my opinion. The combat is not as in-depth in this compared to that game. And, I mean, unfortunately, this is yet another game where you're playing as not Legolas, not Gimli, and not Aragorn. So, admittedly, that is pretty disappointing. That being said, though, I mean, the set dressing, I think, like, the set design, I think still looks pretty cool in this game. I mean, just look at this cover alone. I mean, this is a pretty grim cover. Look at that. So, as far as I'm concerned, I see this as more just kind of expanding upon the world. It's more of a world-building game. So, and I think I appreciate it in that respect. So, because of that, I am going to keep it in the B tier. But do keep in mind that I do think that Third Age is just overall better. Like, it's just overall better if you want an RPG experience within the series. So, make no mistake, though, I still think they're both fine RPGs. Guardians of Middle-earth, though. I could have cared less about this game. So, for those who don't know, this was a MOBA. So, basically, it's in the same lineage as something like League of Legends, or Dota, or Smite. And if you guys know anything about me, I cannot stand MOBAs. I fucking hate MOBAs. Literally, my first round playing Smite on PlayStation 4, I literally had some random asshole just... They weren't even in voice chat. They DM'd me talking shit. It's like, dude, that's literally my first match. Give me a fucking break. So, yeah, toxic fan bases and overall annoying and stressful gameplay, but that's besides the point with those. Unfortunately, Guardians of Middle-earth basically was their attempt at that, but with Middle-earth characters. Mostly from the Lord of the Rings movies, although they brought in some characters from The Hobbit. And, yeah, no, I could care less. I mean, you're talking to, like I said, I hate MOBAs, so naturally, I'm not gonna like this. So, yes, the servers did shut down in 2019, but you can still find physical copies to play the single player in, and, well, it's not really worth your time. So, that's all I gotta really say about this game. And then we got the LEGO games. So, LEGO Lord of the Rings. I mean, we talked about LEGO Lord of the Rings, the theme, in our last tier list. And, I mean, I'm still crying about the fact that we still have not gotten newer Lord of the Rings sets, much to my dismay. But the video game adaptation, I mean, it's a Telltale game, so naturally it's a Telltale like LEGO game, so naturally it's going to be of a higher quality. And truth be told, this is another Lego game that I would consider to be honestly one of the best Lego games ever. And in some ways, and I know people are going to be mad about me when I say this, in some ways it is just definitively better than that of the some of the Lego Star Wars games. So I know that might be heretical for a lot of people, but let's be real here. Even though Lego Star Wars is a classic, or Complete Saga is a classic, it has aged in some areas in which newer games have objectively done better with. And I think it also helps that this was one of the first Lego games to have clips from the movies as voice acting, which I know some people complain, oh, I like the mumble. Okay, but not every Lego game needs the mumble. So yeah, as far as Lego games are concerned, it's pretty good. And then we've got Lego The Hobbit, which they should have just called it The Lego Hobbit. I don't know, that to me makes more sense. But no, it's Lego The Hobbit. I know it's a branding thing, but I don't care. It's a dumb name. Anyways, it's a decent game. I know people don't like it as much as Lego Lord of the Rings. And it is kind of weird that they didn't wait to release this until after Battle of Five Armies released, and so because of that, you don't actually play through any of the levels from that game, although considering how much I really dislike that movie, I think that's probably for the better. So this mostly just focuses on Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smog. And I think it's decent. So and that then leads us into the last three things on our tier list. And that, of course, is both Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, as well as Return to Moria. So, I'm just going to be frank. Shadow of Mordor, easy S tier. Shadow of War, A tier. And to wrap it all off, C tier. So, if you guys know, Shadow of Mordor is a certified banger classic, also canon within the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. Same thing with Shadow of War, which is pretty awesome. So, yeah, but as far as kind of helping bridging the gap between the events of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, even though it doesn't directly have any true correlation with either trilogy, the fact that it was able to have its own cohesive narrative, and to have it stand on its own, and introducing some vastly innovative systems, including the Nemesis system. I mean, that speaks for itself right there. And, I mean, just taking a lot of inspiration from the Batman Arkham games, from Assassin's Creed, I think even from, like, Zelda Twilight Princess in some areas. Honestly, I would argue that Shadow of Mordor, you could make a case that it's up there as being amongst one of the greatest games ever. It's easily the best Lord of the Rings game. It's not it's not even close. It's a certified classic at this point. And well, hopefully one of these days I'll be able to finally play it for you guys, because it's a game that I've been wanting to play for you guys for a long time. And of course, I've mentioned this game on our Caspian Game Awards show for 2014. So go check it out. And check out its sequel. It's not as good. Unfortunately, it unfortunately was released during the loot box craze, so unfortunately there are loot boxes in the game, which is fucking stupid. There should never be loot boxes in single player games. But other than that, that's the only problem with the game. That's if it weren't for that, I'd also put it in an S tier. But out of principle, I have to put it in an A tier, but that doesn't make it a bad game. It makes it a very quality game, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. Though, fuck you, Warner Brothers, for patenting the Nemesis system. Actually, a big fuck you. More games should have that system, because that's one of the coolest things ever. Which, for those who don't know, basically, if you get defeated by an enemy in the game, the enemy will remember you. And will even adapt to what, like, how much, basically they'll be adapting to how much stronger you got, or they might even like flee and they'll remember you. It's a very complicated system, but basically it adds a lot of narrative depth to stuff that otherwise wouldn't even be a part of the main campaign. And it's one of the coolest things ever, but fucking Warner Brothers had to patent it, so video games can't actually use it, which is stupid. I mean, thankfully, the 2 games that it's in are fantastic, so that's at least worth something. And then, one game left. No other game released between. We do not acknowledge any other game that released between Shadow of War and Return to Moria. Okay, fine. I'm not touching Gollum. It looked like shit. That's the only time I'm acknowledging Gollum. So, like, I know what tier it would be, but I'm not putting it on there because I don't want to acknowledge it. But anyways, Return to Moria. So this came out late in 2023. It is a survival game similar in vein to Northgard. So if you, or not Northgard, wait, what? Valheim, that's what it's called. Yeah, Northgard is an RTS. Valheim is what I was thinking of. Wait, no, was it Valheim? God damn it, I don't remember these freaking, God damn it. There was like another survival Viking game that I genuinely cannot remember the name of, and it's gonna annoy the fuck out of me now. But basically, it's basically another survival game set in the mines of Moria. It's essentially, the idea is them trying to revive the mines. So it does take place after the events of Lord of the Rings, although I don't think this is a part of the Peter Jackson timeline. I'm pretty sure this is another game based off of the books. So that's always great. And I guess just for me, the survival game has got to, in order for me to really get into survival games, it's got to really engage with me. Because for me personally, survival games tend to be pretty hit or miss. And thankfully this one is a decent one, but I'm not going to pretend it's like any that is extremely stand out-ish. So, I don't know. It's just kind of one of those... It's just kind of one of those games that is just decent. But that's all I gotta really say, you know? So, Tribes of Midgard. That's what I was thinking of. Okay. Sorry, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. It was Tribes of... if you know Tribes of Midgard, that's the closest comparison I can think of with Return to Moria. So, But yeah, that's the tier list. And we did it in record time, just under 2.5 hours. Hell yeah. So, yeah, this was definitely an interesting list. And surprisingly, definitely more good than bad, which is a good thing because I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite fantasy franchises of all time, and I mean, Peter Jackson movies are two of my favorite, or just my favorite movies ever. So, just the fact that I was able to rant about a lot of these, granted, not as in depth as one could ask for, I just think it was still pretty enjoyable overall. And I just want to give acknowledgement and thanks to J.R. Tolkien. I know he's dead, but just the fact that he was able to help pioneer in the high fantasy spawning the idea of high fantasy is pretty awesome. And granted, I don't know how he would feel about a lot of the media post death. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he'd probably like, I feel bad for saying this, but he may or may not be rolling in his grave. Because I don't think he would particularly like a lot. Like, he definitely wouldn't like a lot of the changes in The Hobbit. Now, I don't know how he would feel about the video game side of things. But I think most of the creations, at least in like the A and the B tier, and obviously with the Shadow of Mordor in S, I think a lot of that comes from just more so appreciation and love for the original source material. And that's something that I at least hope to acknowledge. So yeah, thanks for making one of the best sets of books ever and establishing a universe that is loved and cherished by millions across the world. And thank you, Peter Jackson, for creating literally the best trilogy of all time. So, but yeah, that's the tier list. But before we actually end this, I do want to make a personal announcement. So, okay, so first of all, tomorrow is most likely going to be the Caspian Game Awards for 1991. It just really depends on if I can get the slideshow finished, because unfortunately I've got a decent amount of homework that I want to make sure I can get done with, but that all just depends on everything. So do keep that in mind. If I have to delay it to Saturday or Sunday, then I will. But normal streams will hopefully start up by the beginning of the next week regardless. But also, and I think I'm going to make this into a separate stream. Recently, there were some things that a few of the people that I used to associate myself with did kind of reach a bit of a boiling point. And so if you start seeing some people on here less and less, keep in mind that I no longer really associate myself with them. I don't want to get into details as of this moment. That will definitely be for a later time. But let's just say it was definitely yeah. So, but that's all I got to really say about that right now. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this. If you guys did, of course, if you're watching this on Twitch, of course, hit the follow and the bell icon. If you're watching this on YouTube, of course, hit the subscribe and the like button as well. If you guys want to share this over to other people, feel free to do so. If you want to directly support the content, make sure you hit the subscribe button over on Twitch. And I also did update the link tree, so if you want to check out all my other content, feel free to do so over there. But yeah, either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good night, and peace out.